In talking about different orders of the construction of the tabernacle, the writer of Hebrews says of these things we can't now speak in detail. But he's speaking of the regulations for worship in that earthly place of holiness. The tabernacle of Moses is a picture of you. Has anyone ever told you that? Do you know? The tabernacle is a picture of the human construction. So you have the outer court, which is our physical body. You have the inner court, which is our soul, our mind, will, and emotions. And each of the implements, I could unpack this, but each of the implements and the stages represents the progression of things by which the personality and the soul is sanctified. So the tabernacle of Moses, God went to great lengths. He went to great lengths describing, he told Moses, be careful to build it according to the pattern I showed you. So there's precise measurements. There's how many grommets and rings and, make this out of wood and this out of brass and this out of gold, and the craftsmanship looks like this, and pomegranates here, and weave in this, and the ark is built that way, the altar, the bronze laver, the candlestick, it's all very specifically crafted by a blueprint divinely revealed by God to Moses to build a tabernacle that could house his presence. Well, later on, when it says in John that Jesus dwelt with us, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. He tabernacled with men, it says. He dwelt with men. Jesus was a living tabernacle, the presence of God on earth in human form. This is why in the picture of the tabernacle that was specifically given to Moses, the presence of God was meant to live in the Holy of Holies, in the innermost part. That's where the presence of God was meant to live. And the whole tabernacle was covered in skin. Because it's a picture of humanity. It's the construction of you covered in skin. You're the dream of God, and he wrapped skin around it because he wants his presence to live inside you. And so the story of the tabernacle is all about how God comes to dwell with man. And in a fallen world, it requires a blood price. It requires a progression of cleansing. It requires an atonement so that there can be access to the holy place behind the veil where the ark is. Now, what was in the ark? The ark was covered in gold. It was topped with the cherubim. That was called the mercy seat. And inside were three things: the law of Moses, the rod of Aaron that budded, and the pot of manna. So here in Hebrews 9, and you can look at it later, I'm not going to go to it, but in preparation for a full discussion of the superiority of the blood of Christ, which grants unrestricted access to God the Father, we're hastily reminded that prior access involved getting through a series of stages to a veiled divine box in proximity to which man could enjoy for a limited time and under strict quality control the manifest presence of God. But this was very limited. It was a very holy structured process because under the law, the strictest kind of performance was required. And the high priest could actually enter only once a year. And if he did anything wrong, they had a rope around his ankle to pull him out of there because he was a dead man. And the whole thing is a picture of the high priesthood of Christ eventually preparing a way that removes the veil so that we have constant access to the presence of God. But under the law, there is something that has to happen, and we haven't gotten it right in how we understand this. Here again, we must be vigilant to ask and remember which tablets are in the ark. Let me say it differently. The tablets of which covenant? See, we call it the Ark of the Covenant. And so in our fuzzy thinking, we think, well, that's a good thing. The Ark of the Covenant, it was the manifest presence of God. It is a good thing. It's actually a picture of Christ, the manifest presence of God with us. The Ark of the Covenant is a sign of the faithfulness of God. It led Israel into victory. The Ark of the Covenant was the place of His presence in the Holy of Holies. It's good. But when we say the Ark of the Covenant and we talk about the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, and all of it gets blurred together and we don't know what we're really talking about. But what was inside the Ark was the tablets of the Old Covenant. So the law is in the Ark. What grants access when the law is brought under the blood? That's what grants access. So once a year, the high priest would come and enter into the Holy of Holies. The place would have to be filled with smoke. The lamps are lit. There's the table of showbread. The last stage is the incense that fills the atmosphere, because you're about to step into the presence of God, and no man can see God and live. So they had to be prayed up, cleaned up, and blurred up. And they step in, and you have the tablets written in stone that codify the judgment by which man will be judged and cursed if he fails to comply with the terms of that covenant. And this is wrapped inside a golden box that bears the presence of God. But the only way that can be approached is if the law is brought under the blood. And so the high priest sprinkles the blood on the mercy seat as a picture of the atoning work of Christ that brings Moses under Jesus. And now you have access because the law is satisfied. Now you have access because the blood has been applied. And everything about it, Aaron's rod that budded was, if you study the context, that happened in a contentious period where they were saying, well, why can't we be the priest? Or why can't we be the priest? And so there was a test where all these people that wanted to be the priest, they've got to put their family stick in, and the one that budded validated who was the real priest. The pot of manna was the provision of God, Jehovah Jireh, the supply of God. So our need and His supply in the true priesthood, given the burden and requirement of the law, all of this is brought under the blood, and it all points to Jesus, the supply of God, the true priest, who brings His own blood to rectify and balance the books in our debt of sin.